The mist of what we need to catch to connect again to the original grid is there within you. The outlines of your ocean contain your wisdom, your belonging, the reset, the rumble, the right, lengthening as the waterfalls come up the spine, opposite of gravity. We get tall through the vertex, the top of our heads, the beginning of our visceral spine, or better known as central chain, coming from old osteopathic wisdoms. The vertex reaches to the sky as our waterfalls begin to bounce both against gravity, in front of our spine, as well as down towards the earth, flushing out through femoral triangles of the lower extremities, bathing our presence to reach our roots as we root and ground into the bed of our pools. Whatever no longer serves can evaporate. Perhaps we take a picture with our eyes of the soft flowing waters that we see in the external. We take a picture with our eyes as we dive in to the backside of the peritoneal sac, the backside of our sensorial abdominal sphere, resting, bouncing with the kidneys, the sacred envelopes, catching the minerals and filtering, letting go of the mist and droplets out and in, into ourselves as we breathe. And just take a moment in the silence or in the sounds around you to sense the waterfalls within you that call, the whirlpool spaces. You can sense in the axillary areas, the armpits, the sacred space, gathering in the upper extremities, upper thorax. Does one whirlpool spiral? Is the other one murky or clear? Sensing the waterfalls and opposite glides of the spine. Is there a space that calls for opening? Or just simply for connection? Is it the place where the soul lives? Sensing the sinuses in the brain, the sacred brain that we know little about. Is one side pouring more than the other? Sensing the difference in pressure zones between the chambers of the body. Is there a place that feels compressed? Is there a place that feels overexpanded, or is it just right, like the three little bears? Being playful with inner child self, we can just listen into the whirlpools and flow. Does one leg waterfall into the earth? What does the other leg say? We are made mostly of water, and the waterfalls can guide us, and we can use sound and movement, both with our hands, with our clients, and within ourselves in certain practices where the intelligence choreographs into expression of original tone. This is an introduction lecture today, just to explore where we come from. And as Emily would say, why are we so much made of water? when we feel so dense. We're 60 to 75% fluid based. And it's not even really fluid because the fluid carries so much. So it's sort of an in-between substance. And we're made up so much of that. It carries the nutrients, it carries the intelligence. Yet we feel so dense. How can we play with gravity and sound when we're doing visceral work? Sometimes we can just hum or even think about humming, and maybe the viscera wake up. Maybe they reach to, maybe they sense a frequency that they can trust. We don't necessarily have to animate and roll and sound in order to offer that essence of dialogue. Sometimes it's just a matter of letting the outline of our ocean flow. Even just the idea of what that means can offer a fluidic dialogue in our work. Okay. Here we go. Welcome to Three Bodies Institute. Today is a really lovely collaboration. I think it might even be the first time I've actually had a co-friend, colleague, guest in a lecture with me. I'm really thrilled about this. It feels really good to be hosting Frank today. He's going to, again, be speaking about his new project, The Fluid Moving Life, the Primordial Lounge. He'll be announcing that and talking about it. We will be offering that online October 13th, 10 Eastern Time. Online 90-minute deep dive with Carey and Frank. So we experience that we have waterfalls within us. And sometimes in the visceral work, we get really specific, looking for certain structures or feeling tides or pulls inside the gelatinous substance, the ground matter inside the fascia, can pull us into these very specific places, or perhaps we're in an idea of outlines, or perhaps we're in tides and expanding. And now we can start to begin to think about working with the waterfalls and the whirlpools, especially with a lot of the fluidic insult that we've experienced with all sorts of medical interventions and vaccines and whatnot. There's a lot misting off of the falls. So in clinics since in the past 2-3 years, it's been a lot of rapids for me. And inside the rapids, there's a lot of information, and it can be playful. There are certain areas in the body where where there are junctions of these waterfalls where they meet, just like riverbeds. And these are areas that are calling more than ever before. And these are areas that we can also do personal work with Continuum, which Frank will talk about, where we can work into some of the rapids in our body and be playful as we surrender to these dialogues, these pulls. If we look at and think about pain and pain on many levels, we're starting to go back again to the beginning, looking at Descartes' way of assessing pain. He wrote about how the long fiber running from the foot to the head is pulled by the heat and releases a fluid that makes the muscles contract. Osteopathically speaking, one of the first things that we learn in the lower extremity, which is in first year, is how important it is to assess the foot, the cuboid and the navicular, the natural fluidic pump of the feet, how it's directly related to the SBS, the base of the cranium. And working through this line, we realize there really is a line. Everything is continuous. The brain is even a tree that floats within itself, completely conducted by the waterfalls. The waters are what conduct the functionality of the nerves. And the neurotransmitters and the important endocrine chemicals are what create the functioning. And so we start to look at these lines, and we look at the waterfalls in between the ventricles that produce the cerebral spinal fluid. We look at the waterfalls that trickle out from the spine at the level of every vertebra. mid 1500s, Descartes wrote about how the brain was a pump that moved the fluid around to do the brain's work, such as making a muscle contract. The idea that the brain and the fluid, the magic fluids that glow under the microscope, are actually living inside the body as the waterfalls trickle out to give intelligence to the tissues. This is a wonderful way of working where sound can also, coming from the mother portal and the beginning of the digestive tract and the tonsils, the very first immune station, we can give sound that will emanate and live then through travel in the body. Looking at the National Library of Medicine and looking at physiology of the cerebrospinal fluid, knowing that we have generally about 125 to 150 milliliters at a time. We make up to about 500 milliliters in a day. But what's interesting is that it's even written that it leaves the subarachnoid space through the arachnoid villi, these little intelligent hairs, webbings found along the superior sagittal venous sinus in the cranium, intracranial venous sinuses, and around the roots of the spinal nerves. So we know that this grace of fluid, the microscopic waterfalls, are able to actually flow out of each neural sheath and trickle into the body. The clearance of the CSF is dependent upon the posture of the individual, pressure differentials, and pathophysiology. So often, at least in my modality of traditional osteopathy, we look at the posture, we're looking at a lot of biomechanical interrelationships. The pressures are so important. And that way we can work, if we're working in pressures, with the different pressure of the chambers or cylinders in the body, essentially the cranial, the cervical, thoracic, abdominal, and pelvic. These are tight pressure systems and large volumetric holds with perhaps a focus or dialogue or sound offering to areas like the renal fascia of the abdominal sphere, a very tight system of very thick, elastic fascia. Usually fascia is not elastic fascia. It means that it can actually guide the more strict fascia to move into flow. So perhaps if we are holding volumetrically and working with renal fascia, and perhaps we offer a humming sound, very specialized sounds are available as well through the continuum movement practice. Perhaps all of a sudden the renal fascia that has been in a state of compression, in a state of holding, starts to breathe and calls the waterfalls in, allowing the pipe of the psoas to loosen and flush so that the kidneys themselves can begin to, even on a microscopic level, drop and open. Creating less pressure in the abdomen gives much more space to the thoracic cage where we have suffered, we've had breathing issues, where waterfalls have become a little bit more sticky and muddy. If we release and focus on the abdominal spheres and pressure systems, this is where there's give in the supporting cylinder from above. So we look and study also the pressure systems, and this is where we get into some of the biodynamic, osteopathic, manual therapeutic techniques, is to think about stepping behind ourselves as well and noticing pools and lines from our peripheral view so that perhaps the fulcrum that's out of the body because it had to cope or dissociate for some reason, we can notice the glory of this person's ocean, recognize some of these very important hub spaces, and then we can sense through our peripheral view with our eagle eyes that can see 180, it drops home. Perhaps the knowledge is less necessary in terms of tracking the lines or knowing whether we're supposed to apply compression or separation or oscillation. We can sit in the knowing that just knowing about the renal fascia can be a huge offering for the entire family line that may be held in that person's, that may be held in strain in that person's system. And the intelligence of the CSF that trickles out through the spinal nerves will go and pocket will go and fill into that space. Here are two diagrams of the dural sheath. We can see the layers, the spinal cord, the pia mater, which is like a thin piece of silk, the soft mother, the delicate mother line, silk upon the spinal cord. And then we have the arachnoid, which has a webbing, a sponge guiding, channeling, and can have many little micro adhesions, a place that really benefits from the use of sound, movement, allowing it to choreograph itself back into openness. And then we have the dura mater, the strong mother, the dural membrane. These are the meninges that actually, as you can see on the left side, web into the nerve sheath. Web into the nerve sheath. So as the dura does as well through the optic nerve. The idea as well is feeling the whirlpools of the eyes. It's one of the closest places where we can intend to help or hold, offering tidal expansion, where the fluids can gather, the intelligence of the whirlpool and waterfall can flush in, and perhaps flush out a microadhesion that's disturbing the optic nerve, or a nerve that's been dry. Everything gets dry, less mobility, less lubrication, and pop, the hernia goes. These are very fluidic lesions. And the guina, guina is nerve sheath in Italian. The guina, the nerve sheath itself, is the lightest, most delicate tissue that also holds microvessels that feed the nerve. It's a little microcosm between the nerve sheath, the dura, and the fluids. There's a three-body concept, structural, fluidic, energetic. And when we're there, we can close our eyes and sense that misting off, the misting off where we see the rainbow through the delicate steam. This is where there is pre-existence, that primordial space beyond the embryological grid. It brings us to the creator. This is an illustration of a nerve. You can see this very delicate nerve sheath holding these microvessels, feeding the external portion of the nerve. And there's a whole conduction within, very electrical, obviously. And just like water that can produce energy, the water flowing is what creates functionality. The nerves that are in pain are dehydrated. We look at the sciatic nerve. We look at the position of the psoas. We know that the kidney rails along the tracks of the psoas. A lot of the issues there with sciatica is dehydration. It's missing that fluid, that dance. It's missing sound and conduction. Robert Roos, who passed away a couple of years ago, one of my favorite teachers, I'm not going to go into this. You can read about him, but essentially those monoblock, quote unquote, as it says here, monoblock patients where they walk in and they're not really, those cylinders aren't really cogwheeling or rotating in the opposite directions as they should. There's a sense of block. Even when you put your hands on someone, maybe sometimes it feels like a vault. And what he would do is he would gently put people into the most comfortable compression holds. And they would use deep breath, again, sound, breath is sound, deep breath to melt from the inside out, melting the pit where the patient had the control. The patient had the glory of being able to use the breath to expand and meet the spring from the inside and push out those micro crystallizations, those micro adhesions, those dry spaces. Lack of fluids, things become to get very fermented, as Dr. Still would say, fermented and sticky, and the glide would be lost. So with that deep breath in very specific positions that would isolate certain blocks in the air, in the body, twisted and pillows and leaning on top comfortably, bringing them into a deep, comfortable compression, they would melt with the breath. The use of sound and breath. This is an osteopath in Italy. She specialized in vocal cords, and she writes a lot about the importance of the voice being the original filter and how the crackling sound, oftentimes when I practice continuum movement sounds, sometimes I will crackle. And I also use other types of sounds and visceral work that just essentially come from the patient without freaking them out. I might just offer that I might record a sound for them later, or perhaps I'm just asking them to bear with me as I make some sounds. But a lot of times there is this inner song that can come through. And when I make the sounds, what ends up happening is a lot of crackling in myself. And by the time I've repeated it maybe 3, 4, 5 times, there's a softening, and it's a midwifing where I'm the radio on the radio channel, perhaps vocalizing for the tissue what is being called to be heard. Mm-hmm. So I worked for a period with, or studied with a period, just a year before she passed away. I spent time up to a year before she passed away. I spent time with Emily Conrad. I felt very seen by her. She was very happy with osteopaths. I felt a friendship with her, and I was able to learn about essentially how much we can gather from our inner spring. When she would teach in a way where you were gathering resources. For me, Continuum is about gathering resources from within ourselves. She was a dancer. She worked and lived in Haiti for a period of time, very influenced by how they would use their bodies and sound. And it was her life work to bring that into rehabilitating people who had nerve damage, who couldn't walk, who had lost functionality. She would bring in a sense of deep diving into self and really becoming that fluidic, in touch with that fluidic being, using sound to articulate, using the sound to go and speak to the immune system and dance with the immune system. So when we're on the thymus, if we integrate some of this continuum movement, the thymus where the lymphocytes mature, this is a very holy place where perhaps the sound and helping a client moving for them, or offering them just even exercises where they can begin to understand even where their thymus is, can create an entire new relationship, self with self versus self fighting self, like in autoimmune disease. And the thymus sits right above the heart like a hat. It's a very important organ, although medically they say pretty much after age 8, it's not that important anymore. In 1 teaspoon of blood, we have 5 million lymphocytes. Those are the ones that go around and tag so that the rest of the immune system will come and help clean, vacuum, making their way through the waters to support the system. Moving together like the dolphins in the sea, we can go into that space and visualize the change and understand how rich our waterfalls are. We're not just water, we are full of the most gracious intelligence. Gonna move along here so we can get to Frank. So we work, in my osteopathic training, we learned about the central chain. This is a spine of organs and connective tissue that must resonate. If there's a little microadhesion or dryness, then just like a bell, when there's no resonance of sound. Well, I've been working in the past few years, especially with what we've lived, with a sense of a lymphatic spine. Key places, again, where we can connect to those waterfalls, key water places. These are the command centers that essentially program our waters to support the rest of the organism. And so going through, and this is part of the biodynamic osteopathic nanotherapy program, is to go through and begin to understand that many types of modalities, people with master hands, and sometimes even beginner hands, can come and understand the importance of certain pocket places, learn about them, experience them in deep dive through these sort of guided meditations, where we go through and live within the systems to understand palpation better. These are parts of the lymphatic spine, which in times that we have lived and with syndromes like long COVID, et cetera, these are areas that are precious and waiting to dance again. Okay. Hello. Okay. The tonsils. There is an M sound in the continuum movement, one of the first sounds. It's an M sound, it's a hum. It's a simple hum. However, it's not so simple. It's simple in the sense that we don't cage into whether we're doing it right. We don't worry so much about the level that we're reaching. The M sound is a very wonderful sound. We can all M. And it's a wonderful thing to launch, to stand on the ridge of our own tonsils, the first initial dispatch stations where lymphoid tissue lives, where those lymphocytes are waiting to jump into glory and deep dive to do their job in the system. This is a wonderful place to call to prayer in ourselves, to guide the intelligence forward, and to begin to make that relationship in terms of connecting to self in different ways. The call to intelligence, like the call to prayer. We have villi all over the body. We even have cilia in the brain, these little hairs that reach. They're constantly reaching for nutrients, reaching for the cerebral spinal fluid, reaching for contact, to be met, to be absorbing nutrients, to carry waters to where they're supposed to go. Even just knowing that as we hold volumetrically the area of the small intestine, mesentery, is a very powerful thing where we can use sound. Oftentimes, especially in the gut, if we've had a lot of medication, if we've ever had any sort of parasite, if we've ever had a lot of inflammation or infection, oftentimes we create what are called coils or microadhesions. It's essentially tissue that's sticky, and sound is very useful to bounce into those microcapillaries, those microvessels, to bounce sound and then perhaps play with, I wonder what my belly did when I was an embryo. And just even thinking about that, moving with self or with client, we can open up channels to bring in oxygen. And we know that the microorganisms that create havoc and create fermentation, they don't like oxygen. With breath and sound, we can vibrate nutrients to sight. And then all of a sudden, maybe the back is a little bit looser because we know that the root of the small intestine, the root of the mesentery that holds the small intestine, is attached at the level of lumbar 2. So sometimes sound and movement, or just sound itself, M sounding, letting your belly dance, listening to your choreography within the fluid, can create structural change. There's a study, let's see if I can move this so I can read it. There was a study at the Boston Children's Hospital where they were essentially studying embryonic mice, noticing that the choroid plexus can act as a conduit for inflammation that can arise from maternal inflammation impacting fetal brain development. We now know that there's an exchange. We now know that stem cells are received from the fetus and can live in our bodies forever as mothers. What a gift. But with that, we also know with genetic expression, and we know even the CSF, which I think is the next slide, that the CSF, these little hairs, will actually respond to their environment. These little finger-like cilias, these hairs, will respond to what is in the external, just as our central body, if we're not well, perhaps it's a reaction to our external body, to the external environment. And environment plays a great deal in our health. We can find so much wisdom by holding ventricles. Our ventricles will respond as well to the ventricles that we hold. And perhaps as we hold the ventricles and we feel that inflection, they actually reach with their wings, the lateral horns reach out like the wings of an owl, that we can begin to experience flight with our clients. It's a wonderful place to offer in a session with such a great expansion, to offer them to possibly integrate an M sound humming into the work, explaining to them that the vibration creates movement of the fluids. Deep down as well into the heart, the basal ganglia, an area of perception, involuntary movement. It's a place that holds reaction. Think about it as well. It looks like a harp, and we think about how sound, lullabies when we were little in pediatrics. This is where I first learned about using sound, was in the pediatrics course at the Collège d'études Osteopathiques, where I studied. We had a wonderful teacher who would teach us about the use of sound. We would hoot, make owl sounds for the liver, different sounds for different organisms, and to hold and have playfulness with our pediatric patients as well, to play music and to make sound to the brain as a gift. Reflections in nature as well. Playing with the idea that nature is a reflection of our own anatomy and physiology. The basal ganglia is connected to habit learning and motion, involuntary movement. Dopamine input is a great place to hold. And often those kiddos that are on technology 24/7, when we go to the basal ganglia or we ask them more so to rise up into our hands, it can feel so electrical that this is absolutely where we might want to use sound and movement to just discharge the holding too much light, too many positive ions. Oops, the vagus nerve. This is a big part of the BOMT program, is working with the vagus nerve. We know that 80 to 90% of the vagus nerve's responsibility is to bring sensorial information up to the brain. It engines the upper portion of our digestive system, but it is a huge highway. They've even had studies where they saw that H. pylori was able to travel up the highway to the brain. It's a huge highway. It's very electrical. And it depends, especially at the level of the esophagus. We know that this is one of the only places where the vagus nerve has sympathetic and parasympathetic action or engineing, where the esophagus needs to contract and expand. And that is also what the flowers do in the cycle of a day and also in the cycle of growth. And offering those mirrors in nature, offering in our hold as we hold the cranial base where the vagus nerve exits, and we hold and ask the vagus nerve to rise up into our hands, that electrical Wonder Woman rope up, to ask how it needs, what it needs in terms of dialogue. This is another place that's very sacred where we can offer sound. And I put into the presentation as well the different pathways, because the vagus nerve, known as the wanderer nerve, webs into an enormous portion of our body. So being able to, at the level of the sternum, mediastinum, dropping into the big canyons and allowing a dialogue to happen biodynamically, it can be useful for the total perception of the body. All of the waters can change. The tempesta, the storm, can change if the vagus nerve is held and able to just, even through the electromagnetic body, just lengthen and take an exhale. See how we're doing here on time. Okay, coming around. I mentioned that the abdominal sphere is sensorial. We know that with babies, they really like to lay on their bellies. Animals, we know if they expose their bellies to it, it's because they feel quite comfortable and safe in their environment. It is our sensorial sphere. It is where the vagus nerve also is webbed into gathering that information to bring it back up so that the body, the organism can decide how to metabolize. And we know the contents of the container. All the organs have different motility patterns when we breathe. There's a mechanical biomobility, and there's a motility, the innate breath of expression through the organs that we learn about, especially in the BOMT program. Sometimes understanding the dance, we can move a bit more into the ease. When we know a bit about the motility, we can also express, well, let's go there into the ease. Let's M sound. And maybe the ease isn't so counterclockwise. Maybe it's a spiral and dip and then turn. Sometimes we can become more fluid in the dance as we learn a lot about the motility and innate motion of each organ. For example, the small intestine in flexion, in inhalation, will go into a counterclockwise rotation. If our nose is 12 o'clock, our pubic bone is 6 o'clock. The flexion pattern would be ideally counterclockwise, and then in exhalation, it would go into clockwise. Well, very rarely do we feel it like that, and very, very rarely do we really feel 50-50. So sometimes leaning into that and using, like I said, sound can help us dance better with the motility patterns in the abdominal sphere. This is another study where it talks about the lymphatic system and how the fascia itself is derived. Essentially, the arachnoid is, or the pia mater is what links the brain and nervous system to our skin. It is the deepest level of fascia is the pia mater, and then we go layer by layer by layer by layer through the pulp of the lymph through the extension and interweave of the lymphatics, we can go all the way, if we're invited, to the center of that galaxy. And then layer by layer, we can reach it by even just touching the finger. We know that we can be called inwards to land at some of the deepest places through this by the intelligence and guidance of these waterfalls and spirals and fluids. The liquid fascia is its own nervous system. You can read about that. Another nice place to work volumetrically with the idea of chasing waterfalls or standing in the midst of ourselves is around the brachial plexus. We know that the collarbone itself, I worked last webinar, I showed you the nice pumping technique of the collarbone to help release an area that's key to the lymphatic drainage in the body. But we also know that with every breath and the mechanics of the collarbone itself and how we move with breath, that it is massaging some of the most important nerves. The vagus nerve dips underneath it. We have the carotid that dips underneath it. It is an area where with each breath, it is massaging the fluidic system. It is pumping and creating tides within the vessels and flushing as well the nerves like the brachial plexus and anastomosis of nerves that meet. It's a very important pocket place where we really want the waters to be crystal clear. This is just a picture of that vagus hold that we talked about, a very important technique, a key technique in the BOMT program. The lymphatic system is a network throughout the whole body, and the lymphatic system, as even Andrew Taylor Still wrote, it drinks more fluid in the body than any of the organs, any of the viscera. The lymphatic system is the system that drinks self and transports it, flushing all of that brain information. The essence of the soul at the base of the head is what is living throughout the system that goes and grabs and drinks the waters of self. And we have three bodies. This is from the Osteopathic College. I always talk about the three bodies method, which is the course that I'm going to be teaching coming up, is how we're working on the structural body, musculoskeletal, fluidic, and electromagnetic. And there's a lot of pocketing of old trauma, of inflammation, of dehydration, of fermentation, of inflammation in the in-between spaces. And I spelled out in terms of the three bodies where the dura and arachnoid and pia meet, there's a lot of direct connection to those three different bodies that we work with. So I spoke in a bit about the renal fascia. These are some diagrams from Netter, from Gray's Anatomy. You can see how deep the kidney is completely surrounded by very dense and elastic tissue. It's elastic. There aren't many other structures in the body that have elastin in them. And because they're elastic, kidneys can drop a little bit from injury, from fall, from running, from jumping. Sometimes the kidneys might wiggle low and the psoas will go into spasm. We can see how much it has a direct relationship. Right here is the psoas. Psoas is connected to the spine. The psoas affects the entire lower back. And we know that the breathing diaphragm as well, even through its ligaments, attach all the way down to the sacrum. So these are areas where we really want to focus on hydration, and wonderful areas, again, to use sound and movement, sound and dance. I spoke a little bit about the in-between spaces. Here is an image of the kidney and its rail. If the psoas is in spasm, a lot of times, again, it's because the kidney may have shifted, may have compressed up against the spine, may have even sometimes gone high. Sometimes if I feel adrenal, kidney are high, which is quite unusual, I'll ask the patient, did you have to hold your breath, or did you have an almost close call where you had to hold your breath? And 90% of the time, the answer is yes. So holding that and using sound, we can even sometimes use a choreography using the lower extremity as we work, holding that magic envelope, because we know it was formed by an anterior meeting a posterior formation, which then created lateral fascia. There's a very multidimensional experience in the palpation of the fascia related to the kidney. So this is the Three Bodies Method course coming up. Like I said, I will be in Maryland coming up in September, and then Portland, Oregon, September 20th to 22nd. I'll be in Bali from November 16th to 19th, and then wrapping back around to New York City in February. So if you would like any information about that class, let me know. If you come to Silver Spring, it's very special because the online lab that I'm going to be doing with Frank is actually going to be webbed into that class as a special treat for those students, where we will be doing almost 90 minutes in this full deep dive around some of these structures that we were talking about today. However, Frank will talk more about that because he will be guiding that exercise. All right. And then there is a biodynamic osteopathic manual therapy program that is starting September of 2025. It's 18 months. It's an online and in-person hybrid program where we do a lot of theory and even a lot of demonstrations are presented online. And then we meet together to work with the in-person and clinical practicum. It is a base program of 18 months, and there are also specialized master's programs offered as well, where people can dip as well if they want to focus more on pediatrics, or we have an LGBTQIA+. There are different specialization target programs that may be of interest. This collaborative lab that I'm doing with Frank, which he's going to talk about now, is coming in October. We will be online October 13th, 10 a.m. Eastern time, online for a 90-minute continuum movement practicum, where we do use sound and movement, the continuum movement, to really dialogue, the fluidic dialogue with the body and beyond. So now I'm going to introduce Frank. Frank, hopefully your video is open.
Yes, it's open.
Wonderful. So Frank has years of experience. He's a biodynamic craniosacral therapist. He's a wonderful musician and songwriter. He spent years with Emily, was probably one of her best friends. He'll talk more about that. He has an extensive background working with clients, and I'm so happy to have him here today. Frank, I will pass the mic to you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to say that I am super inspired by your lecture and just the movement of so much availability to the body. It's just incredible. I feel like one of those birds that they're putting the mother's coming and putting the worm, like, it's, very touching. And the photos of Emily brought me to tears. You know, they brought that sensation of, I got very choked up just hearing about that you studied with her for a year and a half at the end of her life. So I feel very honored to be here in her, as she would call me, a representative, of the Continuum Mafia, as she would say. She was very interested in me being Italian and knowing if I knew how to make sauce. So that was her opening question to me 25 plus years ago, when I walked into my first big workshop with her, with 70 people there in a field that I just was beyond my comprehension. And watching her from the very first time she demoed on the floor, where I stood there, and basically seen her go through so many different processes right before our eyes. But the main thing that I saw was her way of being in time and traveling back, where she would emerge from these demos and look like 20 years younger. And that stumped me. Like, how is that possible? I do know the answer, because I followed her around as if she was like the Grateful Dead everywhere she went. Frank was. I spent every penny I had earned with my practice in Florida, teaching movement and gyrotonic and energy work and things that would eventually lead me to meet her. And it was through movement. So what I'm feeling called to speak about is, what is Continuum. It's a movement practice that really looks at our life as movement. Like it's like doing yoga is cool, and I love yoga. I'm a yoga teacher. But we look at ourselves as we are movement. It's not something that we do. So it's constant. We're in this constant interplay with gravity and looking at our connection to our planetary essence and the connection of nature that's all around us, moving mysteriously, moving with sound. Trees in the breeze they have a certain sound. These are things that as I refine my existence here on Earth and really hone in, I love to hang out with trees in the breeze and just feel the vibration from the inner aspect of the tree to the blossoming of the breeze and the movement of each tree, like each of us, is very individual. Although we have these, like blueprint references, like we look at the anatomy, which is thrilling. Here we have on the screen the human cell. So in my journey with where I am with my work and my interest to embryology, which is not something I thought or even thought I would be so interested in. It wasn't from a scholastic situation. It purely came from spending a lot of time with Emily, with the Continuum community, a lot of times in the dark, where I would find myself in shapes that were very embryonic, and I would be very, very deeply into my process in a dark room. And a lot of times I would open my eyes and look up, and Emily would be standing there looking at me, and she would be moving her head as my body moves. So we were like co-regulating with this movement that she found very fascinating. I found very fascinating and shocking at the same time. I says, I don't know what's happening to me. I'm like regressing into what now has become being able to play with my life of being almost 60 years old and go back to a presence of oneself. So, my hot topic, and it's a very interesting topic because there's other folks in our work in the embryology that I'm kind of bouncing my ideas off, the development of my ideas purely based on interest, where my attention has drawn back to very much looking at the embryonic process and simplifying it back. There's like a place in me that likes to simplify. I'm living in New York. There's a lot going on. I spent 10, almost 11 years in Ojai, very slow, downshifted place. And now I'm here and I feel all this amazing experience that I've had in a very fast paced place. So as a way in my continuum practice, one day, I felt myself feeling like, oh, what if I experienced myself in this present moment, the sensation of that. I took a baseline and I was in my practice making some sound. And I said, oh, I can feel where my attention is kind of wanting to go back to being oneself. Now, there is a time in our development where we are actually one cell. Now, the conversation that's been bouncing around is we're also humans. So there's a picture of a baby and the dog. And that is my little grandnephew, Mavi, and their dog, Dakota. Mavi he's 4 months old. And I sit with Mavi and we hang out together, and he likes hearing about, wow, boy, it must have been really amazing when you were growing in mommy's womb, my niece. And I've been playing with this like one cell consciousness, this one cell presence, this one cell investment of my time and obsession. Being a continuum teacher, Emily always said you have to be obsessed about these things. And you know, I don't spend all my time on it, but I spend a lot of time uh, what I call now simplifying. So meditating is a cool word, but for me, I simplify and I sit in the presence of one cell, because the cell, you know, it's 70%. We have been talking about this 70% water. It's very biological, very biodynamic. The other 30% is, you know, structural and functional. That's really interesting. But what is the presence of being this abundant molecule of water? And I'm sitting here in Queens, in New York, in this amazing lecture, and we are in a field. So if I sit and the time is an inhibitor here, because I see that we're coming to the end, but what I'd just like to sit with is us as a field in the presence of just one cell in the water. And I sit in myself, I simplify myself back to that place. It's something that I've been practicing. And I take it from all the water, the lymph, the blood, the bones, the organs, and the fascia, the muscles, and the nerves. And it's somewhere between the fluid system, as we are fluid, and then the nervous system kind of meeting that. Because we're sitting here with our trillions and billions of cells. We're 28 to 36 trillion cells as adults. That's 12 zeros. So, but there was a period of time where we were less than that. And in fact, one, and in the motif of a whole human being, like my young nephew and us as adults. So the breath and the movement of that cell, of us together in a field. A lot of the work is field work. So working with sound, Carey was talking about the M sound, the hum sounds. So as soon as I make that sound, I feel something that spirals, because our movement and our water, one of the movement is spiral. So we have spirals, waves, arcs, undulation. And so I can consolidate myself into one cell, or I can expand into 36 trillion cells. And we have that potential. And in that potential, if we in a workshop, of course, we spend more time to play with it, where we go from taking a baseline and tracking how we start off to playing with a sequence of sounds and some very simple micro movement. And if we layer those sounds and we create a sequence, and I like to think of it as a motif, you know, every time we go through the sequence, we're a different body. And, you know, it's a current event. So it's, you know, in Continuum, we like to ask a couple of questions. And one of them is, what is a body? And the other question is not why I'm here, it's if I'm here. So, you know, talking about safety, downshifting, slowing down. And of course, when you have time, like we used to spend with Emily, 11, 12 days, sometimes 3 days in silence in the dark. So that's plenty of time. You really get to deepen into the amazing. I just want to say how amazed I am. I'm just a street kid from Queens, and I am amazed at how life moves through our water. And that's not even touching how amazed I am with the whole birth process and the support of both of them, and the work that Carey is bringing. I just want to say, and I'll pause with this, how touched I am, because this work is so important. The consciousness of what we're made of, what makes us tick. And so it's a longer conversation. It's big and elaborate, and then it can be very simple. As simple as an inhale and an exhale and just being with the ocean and all that's in the ocean. So I think that, I don't know how much time we're past 1 o'clock.
Well, Frank, thank you so much. You have a way of bringing us into this place where we can all relate. And you are such a personable, transparent, wise, sensitive, and loving human being. And the circles that you hold, we start, as you said, we're on the surface, and then we just all become united into the most simple and most important form. And I've experienced your poetic ways of bringing us there through your, I want to say the word command, but that's not the word. I want to say grace in your command, because it feels as though what you're doing is creating a protective barrier where everyone can feel an openness to experience themselves without ego, that we all become very dense and nothing at the same time with you. And the wonderful thing about working online, which I'm really excited about in terms of the lab, is that we can turn off our cameras. We can also go into, we can go into separate rooms if we need to dialogue. There's just like when we're doing continuum and training, the whole idea is to take care of ourselves in that space, and online offers a lot of room for people to not have to be seen. Because in continuum movement, something, as you know, as you were talking about, it's like something can come in rhythmically, undulating, and maybe we don't necessarily want to be seen in that process. We can be connected in the field that you create, but we can also have our own privacy. And the lab will be wonderful. It's going to be 90 minutes, October 13th, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Connect with us. You can email us at 3bodiesinstitute@gmail.com. Also, Frank, if you would like to give your email in case people would like to connect with you directly, please feel free to mention that if it feels good to you.
Oh, yeah. My website is wombcontinuum.com, and you can email me if you have any questions. wombcontinuum.com.
Yeah. And to be the heart, or to be the cell, or to be the specific place in between the ventricles that offer the electric imprint of who we are, we can just sit in our waters and watch and float. And I invite you all to come. Thank you for joining us. Those who couldn't join us today, you will also receive the link. I'm going to stop share. If anyone would like to just open up and say hello, if there's 1 or 2 questions, we can take that. We'll close at 15 after today. We'll go over a little bit. I see some chat questions here. Well, it looks like everybody's just great, sharing where they're from. Yes, I am recording.
Can I ask a brief question?
Yes. Hi, Celeste.
Hi. Yeah. Hi, I'm in St. Petersburg, Florida, since everyone's sharing where they're from. My question about sound, because I'm very new to a lot of things, and can sound, you're talking about using sound within the course of a session as a practitioner, or do you also have the client work with sound? I'm just curious about that.
Frank, would you like to answer that question?
As a practitioner, if I'm in a cranial session and I feel called to bring in some sound, I'll ask quietly, would you be open to me creating some sound? And I will do it and bring it into the field. If they pick up on it, a lot of times they're just relaxing and they'll feel the effect of it. I do like to teach it to them to kind of bring them into like what I was doing in the session, if they're interested. And it depends on, like I'll use multiple sounds sometimes or just one sound. But I do bring it in as a practitioner. I find it really helps. And so far, so good. Not many people say, "Oh, I didn't like the sound part." In fact, it's the other way around. They're like, "I really love that sound. I don't know what sound that was, but because there's a lot of sounds. So in the lab, we'll get into some different sounds. For each part of the body, all the bones, the fascia. It's quite interesting.
The sounds are amazing, and I would agree that sound is so key. You might have this feeling to work in your way. There's a structure that's calling, or you feel that whirlpool pull towards lower belly, wherever it be. And a lot of times what I will do is just talk about how we can get dry pockets and how sound and movement hydrate, create conduction of functionality in the body. And I keep it at that. Just very simple, like Frank's saying, simple, simple, simple. And if you hum, did you know that can rattle and lubricate the joints, bring flow into the synovial joints by guiding the waters with sound? I had a client years ago that had a stroke, very difficult. And in one session, I just said, can I move your arm for you? And I'm just going to hum a little bit and use the sense of movement as though I'm expressing it, just micro movements for the arm. And at the end of the session, his finger started to bounce. And it was all from within himself. And it's playful. And, Frank's also very good at Frank is very good at lifting the fear off of feeling silly. It's just being humble and simple and saying, sound really helps. And there's some specialized sounds that we've seen people who were paraplegics can crawl again after time. Would it be okay if I played with this a little bit? I've seen really good effects. It's worked clinically. I've seen change. And people will say, yes, show me the way. So it's playful and simple and effective, very deep. We'll take one more question. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi. My question is, if you have a monoblock patient or suspect you do, would you recommend them creating that kind of compression for themselves at home as well? Like with pillows and using sound, even a simple sound?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and Frank can speak to this as well, as how the intelligence. Me personally, my mother at 8 months pregnant was kicked in the belly by a horse. So I have jolt in my body and born very quickly. And so for me, going into the impact position happens every time I do the movement, the continuum movement. I go so tight sometimes I'm like, I'm going to crack myself, but my body guides me there. And so it's safe. And then once I'm there, oftentimes that's where we will bring the sound in again. The sound to meet with the voice, the spring of the action, going into compression, nodding up into a pretzel, and of course, taking the pillows sometimes to even create sort of a womb sense where all of a sudden, like an octopus, you're just sort of grabbing the things that you need and you're putting it, you're pushing it into your, wherever there was that press, and then even a hum sound. And sitting with being mothered by that gelatinous intelligence within our tissues will come and show us the way out. It's so effective, especially in those little micro pockets in the spine where maybe that arachnoid, any dural adhesions, any little, the spinal cord can adhere inside the spine. It can stick up against it and we don't have as much of a glide. So sometimes we'll go into enormous twists and hum, and intelligence will come in and say, we're going to corkscrew this until we get a little damming effect to pop out. This pocket of water, this microscopic pocket of water will carry me home. And so there's so much you can do with that. That's why the workshops are great, because the workshops are so huge. You could just turn off the mic and sit in the field and feel so much happening. That's why even if someone's in the class, microscopic, dialoguing with their pinky finger, they're going to be grabbing the waters of that field and taking it with them. And then they can play with it individually and experiment with it, because that's the wonderful thing. Frank will say too, there are no rules in the continuum movement in use of sound. There are no rules, and it's so personalized that when you're in those circles where you have like 30 people in the room all doing continuum, everything's different. And it's also can be quite emotional, which is another reason why it's nice to be able to turn off the cameras, because tears will come up without a story. And tears are also CSF pushing out sometimes, creating space with the tears and following that one tear, just like Frank's saying, following and becoming one tear or one cell. It just simplifies the whole process of, am I doing it right? Where's this coming from? Can it help? And if we storytell even with our clients like that, or just let's be one tear, or where are the pools that we can splash and see the rainbow mist in our splash? Where can we go? Where is the help? Where's the source? Calling for the source. Frank, would you add to that?
I mean, it's beautiful to have compression if we're on our own and going into those places and kind of experimenting, like you were saying. But when you do continuum, you go into this sequence. Well, that's really the intelligence of the body, and it's something that is, if you really stay with it and really be able to feel the resistance, because we're created in resistance in the womb. I mean, that's how we're emerging and growing and developing with the resistance. So we need that sort of the piezo effect of the pressure creates actually bubbles and makes more fluid. So it is fluid moving life, and there's so much to play with. And tracking the pleasurable sensation, because there is, when I got emotional and I did feel a tear, and I was like, wow, that tear feels so good, like it's representing this connection to what Carey was saying, the connection to Emily and the field itself. So even when we're alone, we're still being held by the field. It's always supporting us. And so having a group of folks with us, because there are folks, we come to Continuum sometimes and we don't feel like making any sound. So we can kind of echolocate with the sounds that are in the room.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Beautiful.
I'll be joining you